You're watching TVS. In 15 minutes, the first part of One Summer, a story about two schoolboy truants who win a small bingo prize. First, ITN.
Neil Kinnock recommends a new ballot for transport workers. The postal workers go back to a 10-day backlog of mail. The underground battles of Viet Cong tunnel rats. The London Marathon runs away with 2 world records. And the walkabout that delighted the Italians and worried the security men. Good evening. The Labour leader, Mr Kinnock, is making it clear that he thinks there should be a new leadership election for the Transport Workers' Union to dismiss allegations of ballot rigging in the last vote. Mr Kinnock's view is being made known today as speculation increases that the union executive will not call for a new ballot. He believes there are strong arguments for rerunning the ballot. Mr Kevin McNamara, who leads the group of Labour MPs sponsored by the TGWU, has attacked the speculation. He says it's wrong to say the leadership has already decided to drop the new ballot. Mr Moss Evans, the union's retiring General Secretary, says Mr Kinnock's views will be noted, but it's up to the executive itself to decide what will happen. Our political correspondent says it would be embarrassing for the Labour Party if the union were not to have a new election. In the next hour, postal workers will begin clearing the massive backlog of mail which has built up across the country during the Northampton Post strike. 20 million letters and parcels have been held up. 900 workers who've now accepted a deal say the post office were trying it on, but the employers say the strikers had ignored established procedures.
It was the walkout by 1,000 men at the Northampton sorting office on Monday which triggered the rapid spread of the dispute across the country. Today's mass meeting overwhelmingly backed a return-to-work formula. The formula included a commitment by the post office to stick to long-standing national and regional arrangements which the unions say the management broke when it refused to negotiate across-the-board overtime payments for the delivery of polling cards for a county council election.
What we were seeking to do is to make sure up and down the length and breadth of the country that the post office abide by the disputes procedure that we've negotiated. That's been achieved.
Are you saying they were trying one on in this case then?
Yes.
The head postmaster has handed back the polling cards to the returning officer. He still cannot guarantee his office can deliver them.
But we will now have time for negotiations to go forward on a rather less supercharged atmosphere on that whole issue.
The backlog of mail, some 20 million letters in all at more than 20 sorting offices, will take at least 10 days to clear. David Chater, ITN, in Northamptonshire.
Israel has announced that all its troops will be out of Lebanon by June the 1st, 3 years after the Israeli invasion. A stormy cabinet meeting in Jerusalem voted by 17-3 for withdrawal, leaving a buffer zone along the frontier. It's thought this would be up to 9 miles wide and patrolled by local village units and Israeli-backed militia. The Defence Minister, Mr Yitzhak Rabin, said Israel is also reserving freedom of action to send its own patrols back across the border. In Brussels, there's been a second anti-NATO bombing in 2 days, this time at an electronic firm's offices. The blast, smaller than yesterday's at the NATO Parliament, blew out a corner of the building but injured nobody. The same left-wing group that claimed yesterday's bomb said they did it. In West Germany, the Chancellor Helmut Kohl has attended a ceremony marking the 40th anniversary of the liberation of Belsen concentration camp. He said Germany bore a never-ending shame for the atrocities committed by the Nazis. President Reagan, who'll visit the campsite next month, sent a message to the thousands gathered there today. He said the lesson of the Holocaust was that everyone must look after the welfare of his fellow men. 10 years after the end of the Vietnam War, the so-called underground villages of the Viet Cong are open to visitors. Michael Nicholson, in the latest of his special reports, has been to the tunnels, used first to resist the French, then to fight the Americans, and now to entertain the tourists.
This network at Cu Chi, 30 miles from Saigon, is spread over 10,000 acres and is altogether nearly 200 miles long. The connecting tunnels, less than 3 feet high, went right under the front gates of the former US infantry base at Cu Chi, and they open into large rooms which are shored up with steel mesh stolen from the American runway. Thousands of people lived here. Some, like Trang Thi Bak, were born here. She didn't see daylight until she was 5 years old. A wall diagram explains the system. There were mess halls, hospitals, armories, exercise areas, operations rooms and kitchens. Air was brought in through hollowed bamboo, and if it was too dangerous for men to move above, they simply swam through the river entrances. With the Americans fighting their war just above them, the Viet Cong, the VC, conducted their war against Saigon from here. To try and find these tunnels, the Americans employed sniffer dogs and South Vietnamese troops that they called tunnel rats. Sometimes the tunnel rats were successful in discovering this network. They came underground face to face with the VC, and there were firefights 20 feet down. Now the Cu Chi tunnels are for tourists, and Win is a guide, but he's quite happy to recall without any bitterness, it seems, the long years of his underground war.
Our biggest problem was how to hide the earth newly dug from the tunnels. So we put it into piles and then blew them up so they look like craters from American shelling.
Every day now, a whole new breed of tunnel rats scramble through this extraordinary network. Hundreds of Eastern Bloc tourists, heavily armed with cameras, come to see what is just the beginning of Vietnam's newest growth industry. Call it the way the war was won. Michael Nicholson, ITN, Cu Chi, Vietnam.
ITN will be showing more of Michael Nicholson's Vietnam reports in our bulletins this week, and in a special programme to be shown on most of ITV next Thursday. The Russian naval attaché expelled from Britain has left, saying he's never been a spy. Captain Oleg Loss and his wife Valentina said goodbye to friends at Heathrow before boarding an Aeroflot flight to Moscow. He said his expulsion was an unprovoked attack of purely political character. The other expelled Russian official went yesterday. The Norwegian runner Ingrid Christiansen is tonight celebrating her world record in the London Marathon. The organisers are celebrating too. 17,500 starters made it the biggest marathon in history.
The unexpectedly high number of starters was made possible when the organisers allowed 1,400 latecomers to register at the last minute. But the event now runs so smoothly that there were no complaints of undue congestion. Ingrid Christiansen's world-beating time was made possible by two pacemakers from her old club in Norway. She outran both after the halfway stage and overtook another 30 men in the last 7 miles to beat the previous world record by more than a minute and a half. And for her efforts, she won £60,000 in prize money. The men's race was a cat-and-mouse tussle between Charlie Spedding, last year's winner wearing number 1, and Steve Jones, who fought through an attack of cramp to round the last bend in the Mall 100 yards ahead of his rival. For his new British record of 2 hours, 8 minutes and 16 seconds, his prize was £20,000. In the wheelchair race, the battle between Jerry O'Rourke and Chris Hallam was even more exciting. O'Rourke led Hallam for most of the way, only for Hallam to win a sprint finish on Westminster Bridge and break the British record by 20 minutes. While one of the elite runners had clearly overreached himself, at the other end of the scale there were many and varied expressions of animal, human and even other-world eccentricity. Ian Edwards, ITN Sport, at the London Marathon.
Chris Bonington, Britain's best-known mountaineer, has finally conquered Everest. At 50, he's one of the oldest men ever to reach the top. 10 people are to appear in court tomorrow after mounted police broke up an anti-hunt protest in front of the Queen at the badminton horse trials. The Queen, who's 59 today, had been watching a display by huntsmen.
There was no sign of trouble when the Queen arrived after lunch at Badminton House with the Duke of Beaufort and, among others, Princess Michael. Once the royal party had settled down, the crowd joined the band of the Royal Marines in wishing the Queen many happy returns.
Quick.
And there couldn't have been a more popular winner, local girl Virginia Holgate. Congratulations from the Queen, and a well-deserved lap of honour, a perfect end to this very British occasion. Perfect, that is, until a group of anti-hunt demonstrators ran into the arena right past the royal box. Hounds scattered as police charged in hot pursuit, the crowd applauding them all the way. 10 men were arrested. And the Queen, a determined smile on her face, left to continue her birthday celebrations. Vernon Mann, ITN, Badminton.
And finally, Prince Charles and the Princess of Wales took an impromptu walkabout today in Milan and again delighted the crowds on the third day of their Italian tour.
The Sunday ritual of morning service drew a surprisingly large crowd to the narrow street in the centre of Milan, which houses the tiny Anglican Church of All Saints. A simple and adorned place of worship by Italian standards, and heavily restored as it had to be since, unfortunately, the RAF bombed it during the war. There aren't too many Anglican churches in this part of the world, or Anglicans for that matter, so All Saints comes under the far-flung Diocese of Gibraltar. Anyway, the children in the garden of All Saints today became rather special for 10 minutes or so, getting to meet their exalted fellow worshippers. It wasn't in the programme, but a walkabout followed, causing understandable palpitations among the couple's detectives, who've been increased to 5 for this trip. The Prince tried his slender knowledge of Italian, accompanied by some fairly accurate and characteristic Italian gestures. And the Princess moved along a line of hands, fervently held out for shaking. Around here, they're big on body contact. They went to a private lunch on an island on Lake Maggiore, the appropriately named Isola Bella, whose beauties are owned by the Prince and Princess Borromeo, members of one of Italy's oldest aristocratic families. The guests included members of some other families like the Sforzas, the Radicis, and the Viscontis, who once owned most of northern Italy and are still not without a few acres. Lunch involved lamb and veal, as well as 2 kinds of pasta, macaroni and cannelloni, followed by a digestive walk to the hydrofoil. But it did seem a long way from the Prince's wish expressed last week to meet the common people of Italy. Anthony Carthew, ITN, in Milan.
And that's all from us this weekend. Good night.